Hello, everyone out there in the world. How are you on this fine Saturday afternoon? Officially into the less than a calendar week, right? Is that right? Calendar week? Before the beginning of actual baseball. Figured I'd hop on and chat with everybody about some news. There was some news yesterday I couldn't quite get to. So I'm going to waste no time and jump right into it. Since I don't have Patrick here today, it's going to be slightly less produced for you all, but here we go. Welcome into the DNVR Rockies Podcast, presented to you today in a special bonus edition by Green Mountain Dental Group. Going to you live on a Saturday to talk about some news. So this is a little bit of a bonus podcast. We're able to do these thanks to our friends over at Green Mountain Dental Group. And you know they will hook you up with a free Sonicare toothbrush when you schedule a cleaning, x-ray, and exam. It's just a few minutes outside of downtown Denver. They're huge sports fans. They'll take care of you. They'll take care of your teeth. You'll feel great, and you'll get that free Sonicare toothbrush. I am your host for today, all by myself, running solo for Patrick is out there on the road a little bit, and there is news to discuss. I am your host, Drew Creasman. I'm the managing editor of DNVR Rockies. And on today's episode, we just have that news to discuss. There has been a roster shuffle in the organization in the last 24 hours. Jake McGee and Bryan Shaw are out. Daniel Bard, Matt Kemp, and Chris Owings are in. And some of this may have come, like there's varying degrees of surprise here, right? I think the writing had been on the wall for both Shaw and McGee once the players union had negotiated the prorated vesting options, right? So like in a one way that's good for them, because if it had stayed the same, like they still needed to reach their just raw number from before for their options to vest, they were never going to reach those. That wasn't going to be possible in a 60-game season. But by doing so, and for those of you who aren't totally up to speed on this, basically what happened was the number of appearances that Shaw and McGee, and also Wade Davis, but let's put him to the side for a moment, need to appear in for Davis's finish, which is a key distinction, reduced dramatically. So that, and I can't remember the exact numbers now right off the top of my head. It's less relevant now that they're not going to reach them. I think Bryan Shaw's have gone down to 15 games, which seemed, shoot, he might pitch in 15 games. That's still not a ton, and they could decide to cut him after that, but they couldn't because his option would vest, or rather they could, but they'd be on the hook for more money for next season. As such, with both of these players, rather than spend any time putting them out there in the beginning of the season just to see if they could get one final spark of the numbers that looked like they could maybe emerge out of them, the Rockies just said, nope, it's not going to happen. We're not going to be on the hook for these guys for next season as well. They haven't looked great. They haven't even looked good in spring training 1.0 or in summer camp. They've stood out as being particularly poor after having been so for the last couple of years. You all know that because you watch Rockies games. And so they're, while it's a surprise that they went ahead and just did it before the season, I think because they've shown so much loyalty to these guys for so long. And I don't think it was necessarily based on loyalty. I think there were certain things in there as well. Little bits of the data we had talked about, Bryan Shaw had become much more reliable at Coors Field. That Jake McGee's biggest problem was actually more about inherited runners and the home run ball in isolation, but his ERA was nowhere near as terrible as you might think, just having watched him pitch. Regardless, the risks just became way too high once that negotiation had been reached. You can't let those guys' options vest. They can hurt you this year and next year. They can prevent you from going out and making changes. And now, having done this, the Colorado Rockies have bought themselves 2 extra roster spots for the upcoming season and saved themselves, and I haven't done all of the math, but millions of dollars for the following offseason and the ability to go out and do some things before the Nolan Arenado situation that we all know about that was kind of looming over them at the beginning of the season ever has a chance to repercolate at all. Because if the Rockies have a decent season and then they go out and they take the savings from Sean McGee, and here's the key point. I've heard some people say, so you're trusting the Rockies management to then go out and spend those savings? Well, they haven't proven they can do that yet. Now, all of us here, we would love to see them do that. And I would say, Jeff Bridich is still a relatively young general manager, and there was a lot of data to suggest the guys he went out and got should have performed better than they did. That said, the secondary point almost isn't, does he go out and spend the money absolutely correctly? Because we won't know, like we didn't know with Sean McGee until they pitched, right? On paper, they looked like good moves. And if they'd have pitched to their career numbers, they would have been the perfect moves to solve the exact Rockies problem that they needed solved. The problem they still need solved. They need reliable relievers. And so, do they go out and sign more of them despite the fact that relievers are volatile? And we've just seen this terrible example. And if they don't sign relievers with this money that they've saved, what do they go out and get? Because they've got the position guys they like. So, he's almost in the exact same situation, but less than that is this. Can they bring in people that make Nolan Arenado think they've done the right thing? That's also a big part of this, because remember, it's not, and then they would still need to perform in the 2021 season, but certainly to avoid next offseason having this problem come up again and Nolan being, I'm not sure if the organization is committed to winning. I want to win the World Series. I want to see them go out and get guys to help us win. If they go out and get guys, and they'll have money to do that now, they just have to be guys that Nolan Arenado likes for that to not be an issue next offseason. Then there's something valuable to that. Obviously, the most important thing ultimately is that whoever, this money is spent on, help the team win baseball games. But there is that little political side of it as well. And so Patrick and I had talked about this both on air and a little bit more in depth off air, because I think we didn't want to overstate some things, but it seemed pretty clear that the writing was on the wall for Sean McGee. Neither of us ever believed they were going to be allowed to reach those vesting options, either in a normal 162 game season, in this truncated one, whatever it was. The Rockies were very much aware of the situation with these two guys, and they were on incredibly short leashes, as we've now learned. They're not even going to have the chance to break the camp with the team. Now, that's where we are a little bit surprised, because both Patrick and I had them being there at the start, right? And then likely just almost never pitching and losing their jobs shortly into the season. So this has just jumped that forward a little bit. But it did open up two more spots in the bullpen. And here's where we get the biggest shock of this, because again, Matt Kemp and Chris Owings being on the team, not at all surprising. If you listen to our big roster breakdown podcast from several days ago at this point, you'll see that they were both comfortably on both my list and Patrick's list. There's just almost no way for them not to be with the 30-man rosters. They're basically taking everybody with major league experience. And those guys just serve obvious roles, right, where Chris Owings can be a catch-all off the bench. He plays great defense at 7 different positions, has above average speed, and occasionally can run into a fastball and hit it very far. And then you've got Matt Kemp, who's his inverse, right? Doesn't give you anything defensively or speed-wise or any of those other things. He's just there to rake, and he has been this summer camp. He's been hitting at Coors Field, and he's been raking against left-handed pitching. That's what you want him to do. It's no real news there. Then we come to, yes, Will, the Daniel Bard story. And he does remind us that Daniel Bard's last MLB appearance was the day before Nolan Arenado's first MLB game. That's right, Daniel Bard, who has just been named to the Colorado Rockies roster on opening day, 35-year-old righty reliever, has not pitched in Major League Baseball since 2013, 7 years ago. Okay. Again, those of you who are regular listeners to the podcast heard Patrick and I now probably, I think just 2 days ago, more or less dismiss this as a possibility. Now, I will say that was almost completely tied up in the fact that we were of the belief that Sean McGee would be breaking camp with the team. That said, Daniel Bard just sort of steps into Bryan Shaw's role now, I think, as a, he's not going to be used a lot. It's a nice story. There's an interesting comeback here. And if he can pitch well, it'll be a great story. I'm not expecting much, if anything, out of Daniel Bard. I'm just going to be completely honest with you. But this is one of those things where you do have to, I don't know if trust is the right word, but without a regular spring training and with no statistics for me to look at from his last couple of seasons, and his statistics from 2013 do me no good. I'm not going to run through them for you. That would be a waste of your time. So again, I don't know if the right word here is trust, but it's the word I'm going to use. You have to kind of just trust that Bud Black and Scott Foster and Steve Merriman and all of these guys in charge of Mark Wiley, whoever, the collective pitching brain trust of the Colorado Rockies, that they know what they're doing. And I understand why that would be difficult for a lot of people to believe that they know what they're doing. But if they see something in what he's out there delivering, because that's all that there is, right? This is all we have are these summer camp games, a little bit of what he was doing in spring training. I know Bud Black liked him from the beginning. Bud Black does know pitching. And so they're taking kind of a flyer on this guy. And I think it suggests a couple of things here. One, they still want to give those younger players a little bit more seasoning time, a little more time to work in it. They like the idea of having somebody in their bullpen who's experienced the postseason, who's not going to be rattled by the big moment, who's kind of just going to be thrilled to have this one last shot in the game. And as we've talked about before with other veterans, right? If you don't take Daniel Bard here, you just don't get him at all. You have to leave him off of your roster, which means, he basically would just become a free agent. There's a process. He passed through waiver, all this other stuff, but he'd become a free agent, maybe sign with somebody, maybe not. I really don't know. It would depend on who scouts have got their eyes on him. That's all we have with Daniel Bard is what are, the eyeball test is it. And so if you do that and you go straight to Tinoco and Almonte, and they're not ready yet, or they flame out a little bit, or they just struggle in general, now your plan B hasn't worked. Or is your plan B in this situation with Bard as plan A and those guys as plan B? You get rid of Bard, now those guys are your plan A, and now if they don't pan out, you've got to go even deeper into your depth options there, where it really starts to get fuzzy, where now you're talking about guys like Joe Harvey and some guys I just really don't think are going to pan out. So in a way, this does protect that sort of younger core. But so with Bard jumping into Shaw's spot, there's really only one extra bullpen spot here, right? Jake McGee's. And that's where I do think Philip Deal, as a lefty, as a guy who's shown a lot of promise, as a guy who was there in spring training pitching extraordinarily well and missing a ton of at-bats, and a guy who I think is just at that age and at that time in his career where he's ready to step into that. We've talked a lot about James Pazos and his role, and I still think he's the go-to lefty in this bullpen. I wrote a big article on him back in spring training. If you haven't read it, I'll be sure to relink it and get it back out there. But this is a guy who had extraordinary numbers in Seattle, got traded to Philadelphia as a throw-in, a part of something else. Philly totally screwed him up, messed with his mechanics, turned him into a completely different kind of pitcher. His numbers got awful. They sold him to Colorado for almost nothing. And the Rockies immediately just moved him back to what he had been doing in Seattle. And it took him about 4 or 5 months for that to take effect and for him to get back to doing what he had been doing well. I guess you don't have to read the article now if I'm just going to explain the entire thing to you. And that's why his numbers at AAA with the Rockies were god-awful. Because he was just, first of all, he's completely reworking his mechanics. And second of all, he's pitching in one of the most offensive leagues in the history of professional baseball. There was the juice ball. The PCL is already ridiculous in terms of its offensive ballparks and a lot of altitude ballparks and a lot of high wind ballparks. And so the offensive numbers were just off the charts. I think Pazos had like an 8.50 ERA or something at AAA last year. Once he finally got his mechanics back, Rockies brought him up to Major League Baseball anyway, and he was lights out over like 40 or 50 innings for the Rockies, including pitching extraordinarily well at Coors Field. And most people missed it, didn't notice at all, because at the end of a season where they had been just terrible and they'd finished so poorly, in particular, and their entire starting pitching staff wasn't there. You remember, you were there. And so Pazos, I think, is a huge addition. Deal, I think, is a huge addition. I think there's, at least in terms of looking at what last year's lefty relievers were capable of and what they actually accomplished, I think both Deal and Pazos represent much higher ceilings for what the Rockies had been putting out there for much of last year. And it also moves guys like Tim Collins and Ben Bowden into the conversation for that taxi squad, or maybe even to make the roster if the Rockies decided that they wanted to go with 11 relievers instead of the 10. As it is, I've got the bullpen lining up like this. And I don't know if any of you saw my tweet, because I was reading, I was just doing my research and making sure I had some of the details down for this. And I was on an article. I'll go ahead and say it was on Yahoo. I don't know who wrote it, and I'm not trying to pick on anybody. It happens. We all do stuff like this. But somebody had said, so this creates a huge opportunity for Bard, because Wade Davis is their only proven closer. And then they've got these setup guys in Diaz and Estevez, but Bard could be that next guy. And so, of course, I tweeted out a screenshot of that right next to a picture of Scott Oberg looking like, I think you might have missed someone there. So, yes, the best reliever that the Colorado Rockies have, despite what you may have read otherwise. And again, almost certainly an accident. I would assume the writer knows who Scott Oberg is. But I do think it's the kind of mistake that's more inclined to happen toward the Rockies, because people pay less attention to them. And, a player like Scott Oberg, having back-to-back extraordinary seasons, pitching at Coors Field, even shining bright on a national stage and defeating the Chicago Cubs in Chicago, striking out the last 4 batters of that game, just absolutely nails, and kind of forgotten about here. But yes, so Scott Oberg is the best reliever that the Rockies have, likely to be their closer in my mind, if I am interpolating correctly some of the recent comments that Bud Black gave about Wade Davis, though I do still expect Davis to get a few opportunities to close some games. But that's where we get back into that conversation a little bit. We'll do the rest of the bullpen in a minute. Let's talk about this situation here. Wade Davis. Why didn't the Rockies do this with Wade Davis? They cut ties with Sean McGee, who were terrible. Wasn't Davis terrible? Doesn't he also have a vesting option? Why didn't they get rid of him? Fair question, person out there who I assume is asking it. Couple things. First of all, Davis is much more of a 50-50 situation, where Sean McGee were much more 70-30 situations, right? Where you did, now 2017 actually was a pretty solid year for McGee. And you can make an argument that they don't make the postseason in 2017. We saw some really, really good, important, timely pitching performances from Jake McGee, including a save at Coors Field against the Dodgers in a big game. Shaw less so, right? There are fewer moments you can go out there and say, well, Shaw, there were a few. There really were. I mean, there are with anybody. But it's these 70-30 where you're just not getting it. And they've been there for a couple of years. And you've got much more evidence of them not succeeding, right? With Wade Davis, you at least have 2018, where he did set your franchise record in saves. And while his ERA was pretty high for a closer, he pitched in an extraordinary amount of games. And, his losses, his blown saves tended to be big blow-up things. And so that can skew the ERA a little bit as well. I think there's plenty of reasonable belief within the organization that Davis, even if he can't get back to a spot where you could trust him with those most important of innings, look, his raw stuff is still there. When he locates, he gets swings and misses as well as anybody on the staff, as well as a lot of guys in the National League. His issue is lately, especially, last season, really been location and then the Coors Field issue. He's pitched better out on the road, and so people have asked questions, even last year when he was terrible. Now that the Rockies have 30 guys in the bullpen, could they just pitch Wade Davis on the road? The answer to that question is yes. I don't think that they will, but they could, or they could at least extremely limit his Coors Field appearances, which I think we all agree would be a wise thing to do. If he does recapture Wade, because the other thing with Davis is you don't just have the one good year he had in Colorado, then you've also got the 8 years before that where he was one of the most wipeout relievers in all of baseball. You have one bad year on Wade Davis's resume. Now, it was terrible. It was among the worst seasons in the history of relief pitching, and so almost impressive in that way. But you have the opportunity here. If he finishes 11 games, his option will vest for next season, and that's a little bit of a tricky risk. Because you have to put some faith in Bud Black here and in the Rockies front office, and I get why people are a little bit low on that. But you have to assume that if Davis is finishing, and remember, if you blow a save, and then your team, and then somebody else, if you blow it to tie and then someone else comes back out and you go into extra innings, well, then you haven't finished the game, right? But you have to assume if he's finishing 11 games, he's pitching well and he's getting saves. Otherwise, they're not going to throw him back out there. If they use him in any other role, they can use him as much as they want. If Wade Davis is their seventh inning guy, and he may end up being slightly overqualified for that job, which would be great for the Colorado Rockies, then you've got yourself a pretty interesting situation, right? Because then you can sort of keep his raw talent, his ability to get swings and misses. Guys in the league still know who he is. So if he's on a little bit of a heater, and they go, oh man, this guy's coming in the seventh. Eesh, you could end up with that situation, get all the good out of him, and still not have to commit to him for the future because Scott Oberg has emerged as your closer. You could go the other way with it and decide, it's not the worst thing in the world for Davis's option to vest if he pitches well this season, because that means that, again, that makes it that much more clear that his 2019 was an aberration. It's the one bad year on his resume. They're not on the hook for a ton of money. I'd have to double check it for 2021, but you can still let that vest because you need two guys at the back of your bullpen. We've talked about this. Whichever one's the closer and whichever one's the fireman, you need at least two of them. And the great news for Rockies fans here is the insurance they have with Estevez and Diaz, who could fit very nicely into any of these roles. So they don't have to commit to Wade Davis for 11 saves, even if he's extraordinary. They could have him go out there for 5 or 6 save opportunities and have Scott Oberg go out there for, 15 to 20, who knows how many games are going to be this close, and then have Estevez and Diaz pick up a couple here and there. They really do have 4 guys with plus stuff. And whoever's got the best location on any given night with the extra guys you've got in your bullpen, it could be really interesting. But for that to work, the starters have to do their job as well. So I think the Wade Davis scenario just became far more fascinating, and it's really good for the roster that they kept him, because again, it's not just appearances, it's games finished. And the only way Wade Davis is going to, let me just put it this way, if Wade Davis finishes 11 games for your team this year, that's a great sign, because that means they got a good reliever back on the roster, in addition to Oberg, Estevez, Diaz, Pazos, and then we're going to see what Phillip Deal, Tyler Kinley, some of these other guys can do. And yes, Will, I do believe that Jeff Hoffman can fit in there somewhere. And this is going to be super fascinating to see what the Rockies do with Jeff Hoffman and Chichi Gonzalez. And I started writing an article about this. Well, I sort of started outlining an article about this. We'll see if I follow through on it completely. But Jeff Hoffman and Chichi Gonzalez are battling each other like on several different fronts, but neither of them can really lose right now, if that makes any sense. So both of them would very much like to be named the fifth starter, where for the first 2 weeks of the season, first week and a half of the season, it's going to be a completely meaningless designation, the fifth starter. The Rockies aren't going to need their fifth starter until they come back home and until their second series at home against the Giants. So they have until then to decide who that is. Jeff Hoffman or Chichi Gonzalez are, I think they're just the two guys. They faced off against each other the other day. It was great. They both pitched very well. Peter Lambert's out of the picture because he's not 100% healthy and won't be for the start of the season. So, but in this season, I don't know, ask yourself this question. Would you rather be named the fifth starter, or would you rather be the guy in the bullpen who's sort of the go-to catch-all dude for just to help you out whenever, to eat up innings when you're up, to eat up innings when you're down, maybe to pitch some important ones, just to bridge. If guys aren't going to be pitching, past the fifth and sixth inning, you're going to need those sixth and seventh inning guys are going to be so important this year. And this is where I think Jeff Hoffman, especially if he loses out on the battle, which I kind of suspect that he will, that the Rockies, and again, I'm projecting how they'll play because it's dependent on how they're going to play. But I see Chichi Gonzalez doing the things the Rockies really like, pitching reliably, not letting games get away from him, being a totally solid guy, not walking dudes, not getting a lot of swings and misses, but weak contact, fifth starter you can count on, which is just a nice thing to have, right? And then Hoffman, I really think if he took his mentality in the right direction and totally embraced it, he could say, well, look, they're going to throw me out of the bullpen. So here's what I'm going to do. Rather than just accepting my job at first, I mean, you accept your job as the long reliever, quote unquote, as the bridge guy, whatever it is, there at first. Because you can pitch multiple innings, you're stretched out, all of that's fine. But you go out there and you let it loose, young man. I would love to see Jeff Hoffman take that 96, 97 mile an hour fastball and turn it into 98, 99 because he knows he's only going to be out there for 2 innings. Don't save your curveball ever. Many times I've been sitting in the press box I don't think he would mind, but I won't say who. A person that all of you know. And Hoff will break off that curveball and a great hitter will look ridiculous. And you just go, I know he can't. My baseball mind knows he can't. But why don't you throw that every time? And it's because, guys will eventually lay off of it. But over 5 innings, or throw it 50% of the time. Well, again, guys, if they know it's coming 50% of the time, by inning 3, they're looking for your curveball. If you're only pitching 2 innings, who gives a damn? If you're only pitching 1 inning, Jeff Hoffman could come out there and throw 60 to 70% curveball, keep him honest with the fastball the other 30% of the time, put away his average slider and changeup, and just come at dudes with his raw stuff and don't have to save anything. And if he embraces that, I could see a whole new career for Jeff Hoffman as a late inning reliever. And then the Rockies have 5 guys in their bullpen who can throw at 97 miles an hour and up with the fastball and who have wicked wipeout breaking stuff. Right? Oberg with his fastball slider, and Oberg's got a great changeup as well. Davis with his fastball sort of knuckle curve thing that he throws when he can locate that thing. Diaz fastball slider, Estevez fastball slider, and then you'd have Hoffman fastball curveball. It'd be a little different, but yeah, it's I think it would be. I think he could absolutely reinvent himself as that kind of pitcher, and this would be his opportunity to do so if and probably when he loses that job to Chichi Gonzalez. A few questions coming in here. Ryan asking, whatever happened to Chris Rustin? Now I'm going to have to remind myself this one. He ended up somewhere. He definitely ended up somewhere, and he was pitching well in the last spring training, I remember, and people going, the Rockies getting rid of guys who can pitch well. But Yeah, he shoot, I'm trying to remember. Braves? I'll say Braves. I'll look it up, but um so Adam says for the first bit of the season, I expect Chichi, Hoffman, and Almonte all being bridge guys, and then based on performance, Chichi or Hoffman moves to the fifth starter. And that's what I would expect to see as well. And there is a flip side to everything that I've just said, which is why the Rockies have been hesitant to do this for a long time. But objectively, Jeff Hoffman has more value to you and your organization if he works out as a starter. And if what I'm suggesting here, which is that, there's a mental change that needs to happen that kicks him into gear and takes him to the next level. And if it's less about, dial up your fastball and let it all go, but it's really just, he locks in and he gets what he needs. Jeff Hoffman, as a fifth starter who reaches his potential, is so much more valuable to your team than having the fifth setup guy, as I just described. I just think that the setup guy has a higher chance of coming true at this point. I don't know that Hoffman has what it takes right now in his career to work through a lineup multiple times at the big league level. I think that's been his bugaboo. And so if you take that away from him and just let his stuff go, yeah, and he's got the glasses too. That's a great reliever look, right? You come in with the glasses, you've got the Rick Vaughn thing going. Patrick shooting some names at me from out there on the road. Not entirely sure what these are for. Ken Giles, David Robertson, Kirby Yates, Blake Trinan, Sean Doolittle. Are those Jeff Hoffman comps? Sean Doolittle's a lefty, but yeah. Not entirely sure what those names are for, but I'm sure we'll get an update on that. So I'll run through the rest of how this sets up, right? So we've got Oberg and Davis at the top. We've got Estevez and Diaz also at the top. And really those guys, it's just like a four-headed closer machine for your team. I really do think both Estevez and Diaz, especially if they're pitching well and get hot, will be given opportunities to close this season. And it's even further justification for making sure that Davis doesn't get to that 11, right? And Will, you're right, Hoffman should listen to Darren Holmes. And that's another guy who found some success in the Rockies bullpen, right? Holmesy. So Wade Davis was a starter at one point. These guys, and yes, these are the guys, and I see that kind of potential in Jeff Hoffman. I absolutely do. The curveball is no joke. It's an extraordinary pitch. He just throws it once or twice in at bat as a starter because he's not, you don't want to give him a ton of looks at your best pitch. You want it to still be effective in the fourth, fifth, and sixth innings, but I just think it's the way to go. And I've resisted it for years. Again, the value thing is very important, a starter over a reliever. But anyway, I think we're good on Hoffman now. But I do have him there on the team. I've got Chichi Gonzalez there on the team. You've got James Pazos and Tyler Kinley, both got both of them in the bullpen. And this is where, I think it just rounds out with Philip Deal. And it's interesting because Patrick and I had been arguing over, Tinoco and Almonte, and the team said, how about some Daniel Bard? And we went, okay. Fair enough. Sure. Why not? And again, it's because with Tinoco and Almonte, you have guys waiting in the wings, right? Ready on alert 5 for you Top Gun fans. Boy, am I getting old. But you need those guys. We talk about this a lot in baseball, how in a normal season especially, it was the Sam Hilliard thing. You don't necessarily just show up on opening day with all the guys you think are the best players who can take you the farthest for the marathon. And especially if doing so requires you to get rid of other players who may help you along the way. And Daniel Bard's may help you along the way kind of guy. Presumably he won't be put in positions early in the season to cost the Rockies too much. If they find themselves down 4-0 in the fourth inning of a game, the sixth game of the season, and they go, we'll see what our offense can do. But here's a good spot. Let's see what Daniel Bard's got. And he goes out there and he gets shelled. And now the Rockies are down 8-0 in the fourth inning of this game. And you go, okay, it's going to be another week before we see Daniel Bard, or, maybe even that's it. You never know. In this type of season, that could be it for a guy who's hasn't pitched in 7 years, and you just don't know, versus these young guys who you do expect to be a part of the future of your organization. But that said, I'd rather have both. This has always been, there's got to be a logical, there's got to be a name for this. The sort of best bet. You would just rather have both, right? Remember when the argument was DFA Ian Desmond so that you can give Ryan McMahon more playing time? And my argument was, you don't need to do that. If you want Ryan McMahon to play more, play him more. That's a whole other conversation. But I'm a firm believer that you don't get rid of guys you think can help you until you absolutely have to, when you still have Almonte and Tinoco right there. And I think those guys are the more intriguing players. If I was running things, I got to go back to the thing about Bard. I just don't know. It's all eye test, and to some degree, I'm going to trust the Rockies pitching gurus, that they see something here in Daniel Bard, and if not, I think it's just, it doesn't matter. He's taking what, again, I assumed were going to be few and far between appearances by Bryan Shaw. And so do you think Daniel Bard's going to be worse than what Bryan Shaw could have done early in the season? Probably not. And he's going to do so with much less risk, because there's no chance he's going to have an option vest, or if they cut him too close to that, then they find themselves embroiled in a battle with the union and all this other stuff. It just no. See if Bard's got anything for a couple of times, and if he doesn't, you turn to the young guys. So it'll be interesting. And like I said, it's a great story if it works out for him. But I think the obvious big takeaway here for most of you, for most of us, just for most of the people out there, is that the era of Sean McGee is over. The clenching from Rockies fans when they enter the game, the frustration, the anger about some of the most ugly losses over the last couple of years. There's some, I think, closure here that people needed. I did send out a personal note and should go ahead and mention here that I very much enjoyed talking to both Jake and Bryan. They were very forthcoming. They were honest. They were very giving of their time. Neither ever declined a request for an interview for one-on-one time. One of my favorite podcasts that I did in the early stages of doing this podcast was with Jake McGee, and him talking about making his major league debut and facing off against Derek Jeter. I always thought Bryan Shaw, after really tough losses, after those really bad games, was far, far more gracious and level-headed than many relievers, and really pitchers in general after bad performances can be a prickly bunch. And I understand, I probably wouldn't be in a great mood to talk to the media either. We've had some, no one's ever really, really blown up on us, but we've had some bad ones, in my time there of guys just eating it. I don't know how you would have handled, if you were Wade Davis, those Padres games last year. I don't know if there was a way to handle it, but that was rough too. And Davis doesn't like coming out and talking about blown saves at all. And it's clear. It's not that anyone likes it, but Sean never treated us with resentment for asking the questions he knew needed to be asked. He never hid from it. He never blamed anybody else. So I don't think it's worth noting. But it's almost certainly a good thing for the competitiveness of your baseball team that these two players are no longer there. And so, it's one of those things. I said it on Twitter. A lot of people said I am loath to celebrate somebody just losing their job. Like, it's just a weird thing to be like, yay, especially when we weren't even 100% sure about what it means. And again, I'm not convinced that Daniel Bard is some fantastic addition at this point. I do think it opens up avenues, one avenue in the short term and maybe a couple more down the line for young players I am interested in. Philip Deal, Jesus Tinoco, Yancy Almonte. eventually Vin Bowden. I'm less on the Tim Collins train, but I'm still curious. All of that stuff is more interesting. It's more intriguing, and you feel like there's possibility there for somebody to catch lightning in a bottle or to just turn out to be good, right? Whereas with Sean McGee, it just felt so inevitable. It just felt like what you're going to get, and what you're going to get isn't likely to be very good. Ryan, that's a great question. Whose decision was this? Black, Bridich, or as a group? They make all of their decisions as a group, but Jeff Bridich is the guy who signs the piece of paper. He's the president at the top. He vetoes decisions or doesn't. Ultimately, if it's a league where we give GMs a great deal of blame when seasons go poorly or when signings don't work out, like these particular ones, $27 million deals for both of these guys over 3 years, and the Rockies got nothing out of that investment, and that's on him. You have to accept that. That was a group decision too, but Black signed off on that. He signed off on those pitchers. You better believe he signed off on acquiring those pitchers, and you better believe ownership weighed in as well. Dick Momford decided, yeah, okay, I'll spend the money on those guys. You've convinced me of that, but it's Jeff Bridich's move, right? He's the guy, if I may, in the room. He makes that decision, and he made this one ultimately, and so if you, I guess you want to give him credit for finally recognizing. I don't know. Again, I think the timing on this, I think there was reason. I think they should have played a lot less last year, but keeping them on the roster I always thought was justifiable. But taking them off of the roster is much more justifiable. So, good decision from Jeff Bridich. At the very least, they're going to avoid the vesting thing, right? And that's where you do have to give them credit, especially if they can turn around and do something with that, especially if it helps them on two fronts, making themselves a better baseball team and making Nolan Arenado feel like they've got a deeper commitment to winning a World Series. So we will see what happens. But yeah, this is big news for the Rockies, and it's a big deal. And I do think it's going to make them more competitive in the. I think also the schedule probably helped make this decision, to be honest with you. I'm sure they went, well, we were gonna, say try out a couple things early on, see if Sean McGee still have it. Maybe there's not like we can't mess around. Look at the beginning of the schedule. We have to take care of these teams. We've got to get it going in the first half, because the second half of the season is just game after game after game after game against a good team, and they can't slump. They can't falter. Then they've got to have it there. So yeah, Adam, I've got 10 guys in the pen. Where was it? Just to wrap up for everybody: Oberg, Davis, Estevez, Diaz, Pazos, Kinley, Deal. Got Chichi Gonzalez and Jesus Tinoco, Daniel Bard. I'm sorry, that's right. That's because I had Tinoco on my list here. I was like, this is my old list, and I don't have Daniel Bard on there. So, yeah, and I think there's going to be fluidity to that as well. I suspect that one, if not two players on that taxi squad will be a reliever, so that whoever falters is more or less on notice, and they can just go straight to one of these other guys. So here we go. It's getting real now. Stick with us over this next week. We're going to have all kinds of stuff coming your way, breaking it down, getting ready for the season. We're all very, very excited that there's going to be baseball, real baseball. Sounds like they're going to televise the games, the exhibition games in Texas, which is pretty cool. But if you haven't been able to catch those, make sure that you are following us on all the social media, because we've been tweeting out video from down at Coors Field. I'll be doing that again this evening. Make sure you hit me up with all of your questions. And just continue to be absolutely awesome out there. I'll continue to be absolutely Drew Creasman in here. And until next time, I will see you at the ballpark. Bye.